Hi, I'm Colonel Louis Zocchi, and the only purpose for this video today is to show you guys all you need to know about inking dice and making dice easier to read with a contrasting color on their surface. But before I tell you the secrets of how to do it the best way, I'm going to tell you about a letter I just received, and I want to read it to you because it's filled with all of the mistakes that most of you are probably making. And I think that because I was making dice from 1974 till today, I have inked more dice than any other living person on this planet. And I'm always looking for the easier way to do it because I've got, hundreds of dice that I've had to ink. Maybe the correct thing would be thousands or hundreds of thousands. Anyway, I'd like to start by, this is a letter that I just received from Riley Solberg, and I told him I was going to use it for this video. I'd like to start by thanking you for making such great dice. I purchased a set of clear dice when I was 12, and I'm still rolling them 20 years later. They've been all over the world during my time with the Marines, and they show very little wear. I was a crayon man until 5 years ago. I used only Crayola blue on my dice for 15 years. Crayon can't stand up to the dice bag environment for very long, and then it needs to be periodically refreshed. I've been using pigment ink and paint pens for details for a while, and I experimented with many blues and found one that nearly matches the original wax color of my crayon. In my haste, I used nail polish remover to clear the numbers of the pens that didn't make the cut. And it works on metal minis like you wouldn't believe, but I was horrified when my dice clouded up and I saw a shallow impression of my fingerprint on the plastic. Now that happens because nail polish remover has acetone, and acetone will melt plastic. Oh, he said, the pen numbering came off at the expense of softening the plastic. I immediately put down the dice to prevent further damage, and after the nail polish remover evaporated, the dice returned to their normal hardness. The shape wasn't warped, but the finish was ruined. And I remembered an old trick from modeling. If you want something to shine or seal it, you use Futura floor polish, which is just clear acrylic. I put a light coat on my dice, and they resumed their luster, and the ink was sealed in place. Now, Kevin Cook, who's the world's greatest dice collector, has a site at dicecollector.com where you can go and view more than, I think he's up to 35,000 dice now in his collection. Kevin says he uses a mixture of 409 and alcohol to clean the dice when they need cleaning. But I have a better way that I'd like to talk about as I show you what you need to know about inking dice. He said he also uses Zig pens, and Sharpie paint markers are his tools of choice, and I seal them with Futura and I give the dice away as gifts. I used alcohol because it doesn't soften the plastic, and I use a toothbrush to remove old ink. My inking looks tidier, but I spend upwards of an hour to do a 7-piece set of dice. And I know that by using a Sharpie pen for inking the dice, you can do it in less than 5 minutes. So this is labor intensive to fool around with that crayon and to fool around with the other things that he's using. I have a whole series of things that I brought for this talk because there's a lot of people out there that are selling stuff that doesn't work well. And what you want to do is you want to get down to what works and pass over what doesn't work well. And that's why I'm letting you know. I discovered that gem dice should not be soaked in alcohol. I had used a red Deco Art paint on a set of sunstone and laser orange dice. The Deco Art pens tend to have a paler color than the Sharpie paint pens, and I was displeased with their red. I also wanted to remove the ink from a set of opaque turquoise dice that I had. I put both of them in a zip-top bag and soaked them overnight. The turquoise dice came out fine, and I used an old toothbrush and scrubbed the ink right out of them with little effort. The laser orange dice were a different story. I could get the paint out with a bit of effort, but as the alcohol dried, they started to turn white, and the surface became slightly rough. When they had all completely dried, the white frost nearly covered the entire dice, and it reminded me of a frosted window during the coldest of the winter days. You can see in the middle of the face, but the edges were clouded. So the next time I need to clean the dice, I'm going to use your suggestion of putting them in bleach. And that's what I do when I want to get the ink off the digits, is I get an old empty jar and put the dice in the jar and then cover them with bleach and screw down the lid on the top of the jar and let them sit. Sometimes you have to let them sit for 2 days, but most of the time it's just 1 day and the ink comes out of them. My wife has an old dish sponge that I forbid her to throw away because the green scratchy back is soft enough to use on an opaque dice without scratching it. And it just makes the work much easier. He said, I use a hobby knife to remove the gate marks, and it leaves the surface shinier than sandpaper in my experience. I said in my first video that every dice comes attached to a casting runner, and we have to clip it off, and it leaves a little burr sticking out. And some people who don't know what I told them in that Volume 1 and Volume 2, or first and second version of my lecture, they don't know that that little burr has absolutely no impact on how the dice rolls and performs. But we're going to get on with, I have a friend who is a scientist, and he sent me this letter along with a mailing label asking me to put my signature on the mailing label. He and his friends have what they call cursed dice. And so he's decided that the way to remove the curse is to put them into this canister and let the dice sit for a week or so. And they will be blessed in this inactive period by the fact that I have my signature on a mailing label that he will affix to the can, and he's going to put similar signature labels all over the can from other famous game designers. And I told him I think it's not that he's got a cursed dice, but that he's got rounded edge dice that he's been using that are egg-shaped. And I also, in as much as he was doing an experiment, I sent him dice that had bubbles in them. And I told him there's absolutely no truth to the rumor that using a dice with a bubble in it will withdraw the curse from the dice that's got a same shape if the two of them sit for a week on a windowsill shelf out of use. There's been some spreading of stories that all you got to do is take bubble dice, and since they have the magic bubble in them, they will automatically remove the curse from a dice. When a dice is short on one end, as you will see in my first 2 episodes of how to make your dice, how all dice are not created equal, you'll see that just a few thousandths of an inch makes a dice roll funny. Now we're going to get down to what you can do and what not to do. I bought several different types of dice pens, and this is one that I bought. It's called by Stedler. It's called the Tri Plus Fine Liner, and it puts out a really microfine line that can be used for inking dice, and looks like, oh boy, this is going to be really fantastic. It's going to work. Now, as you see me inking this number 1 on this dice, you can see that the tip on this pen is fine enough to go down into that groove and work very well. And also, you wonder, well, like, what happens if I miss and I've got a mistake on the dice and I need to get rid of that? Well, you can just take your thumb and rub it, and the mistake comes off, but so does all the ink that you put down in the digit. So for that reason, I feel that putting out money to buy one of these Tri-Plus fine line marker sets is a waste of resources. The next one that I tried was this set here. It's by Pentel, and although the Pentel works, it doesn't work well enough in my opinion. Do you see this little thing here and this little thing here? That's a removable tip that comes with the pen. And as you use it, the point gets blunter and blunter and blunter. And in the end, it's so blunt that it will not go down just where you want it, where the groove is, and it rides to the left and the right of the groove. And so you've got an overfill or a hangover around the edges, which you can see I have here. Now that's no major problem because you can wipe it with your thumb like this, and it removes a good bit of the overfill, but also rubbing it just the right pressure to leave what's down in the groove down there without pulling it out with the ridges of your skin is a chore, and that's a secondary motion. It takes more effort to rub over these things when you're inking dice, and since that's a labor-intensive step to perform, there's a better way to go at it. And in my opinion, there's nothing better than the Sharpie pen that's made by Sanford & Son. Now watch out. They've been in the business a long time, and this was the very first pen they made, and it's called the Fine Point. And it does have a fine point, but the fineness of that point wears thin very, very quickly, and consequently you can't ink the digits on a lot of numbers before the pen gets so thick and worn out that it rides to the left and the right, and it stops going down into the bottom of the groove. And so you've got I'll spend a lot of time rubbing on this sucker to get that back to a point where the imprint is only in the groove and not on the left side and not on the right side. However, these people, Sanford, have made two other styles of pen, and one of them is called the Extra Fine Point. And you can tell an extra fine point pen because the tip of it does not have a different color than does the barrel. But this makes out and gives you a really nice bold fill. But as I said, the problem with this pen is it's going out of production. I can't find them anymore, and the people who make these have decided to narrow their market down to just making available to you either the regular, which they call the fine point, and the ultra fine point. You can see this pen point is a lot smaller, and it does the job. This particular pen hasn't been used, and sometimes you get a pen and it won't do what you want. You have to write like this to get the pen ink to flow down towards the barrel, and then when it's starting to flow, it'll work right. Which reminds me of something else. When you're not using these pens, you need to leave them standing like this in a glass, because they're all gravity feed, and that helps the gravity pull the ink that's in the barrel down. Now, once you have used these pens and they stop writing, what you can do is you can remove this tip here. You get a wrench and get a grip on that and work it back and forth and pull it out, or you can get it in your teeth like this and pull it free. And when it's free, what you can do then, I would put the cap over it like this, and you blow through it, and that blows the ink that's trapped in the barrel down to where the tip is. Now, the reason I put the cap up back over this when I was blowing is because if I didn't, there'd be a real fine spray of little bitty bits of ink, and I didn't want to get ink on myself or my suit. So that's another little life extender that you can use to make sure that you've gotten every bit of lifespan out of these pens that you use. Now, Sharpie came out with another pen, and what it's got the fine point at one end, and it's got the ultra fine point at the other end. And at first I thought, wow, that's kind of a good idea, because now I can use whichever I want. But what it turns out is that it doesn't have the length of barrel to store as much ink as the other model did, and consequently one end will still have ink in it and the other end will be dry. And so I do not like the double edge, although it's got its purposes for other people. It's just for our purposes, for inking dice, it falls short, because now you've got too wide a mark on your number and you have to do this to get the excess rubbed off the right and the left side. Now, if you're a store owner, the new owners of Gamescience have put together a small package, and I'm looking around and I don't see where I put that darn package. Oh, is this it? Okay. In this package, what they have done is provided with a number of really useful items. They're going to give you several inking pens as well as nail file. Now, it turns out that there's another nail file which we've been at a convention and it's been given away, so we don't have it here to show, but that's not the issue. The point is there's two nail files in here. The other's the cheapest little nail file that you can get. You see women using them all the time. Emery boards, I think they call it. And what that is for polishing off the little nib that results sometimes when the dice is clipped off the casting runner. And this device here is filled with paint remover. So you could use the paint remover pen to eliminate the over inking, or if you slipped out of the groove and you left a blemish on the face of the die, that can get rid of it for you very, very easily. So you just go to Gamescience.com and you order up the what's the name of this package that you've got here?
The finishing kit.
The finishing kit. Okay. Now, a number of people who don't know, who haven't seen why all dice are not created equal, have no idea that this little blemish that you see that comes on every dice when it's clipped off the casting runner has no impact on how the dice rolls. And I've had several people write to me and say that they have play tested. They have done like several thousand rolls, and I sent them some dice that had really big nubs left on it, and also dice that had very fine clipping done to them. And there's no measurable difference in how either one of them rolled. But some of you people are so adamant about the fact that that's not right. It's going to make the dice roll funny. So what we've done is we've put a couple of these emery boards in the package, and a store owner who wants to take the time to make you a perfection model can take the emery boards and rub them until that little blemish disappears. Naturally, he's going to have to charge you for the extra time that he's invested in eliminating that. Or you could buy a kit directly from Gamescience.com and spend the time doing it yourself. If that's the kind of thing that keeps you awake nights, now you can deal with it. Now we're going to get down to inking some dice and why it's done the way it's done and so forth. When you ink a 20-sided dice, it is my opinion that the best way to handle the problem would be to ink in all of the digits that are going around the dice at its center or its equator. And there's a very good reason for doing this. So I'm going to take this ultra fine point pen and I'm going to ink in at the equator the rest of the digits. You see there that I have made a blemish on the 7, it slipped out, and now the blemish is gone. But in any case, what I'm doing is I'm going to make a belt of inked digits around the equator, and when I finish, all the digits will be done. Now, the reason for this is that ink takes some time to dry. But if you're using, if you have a black dice or a dark blue dice or a sapphire colored dice, the best tool to use for inking it will be the Deco Color pen, which can also be, it will be in that package that you get from Gamescience.com. And we've tried, as I showed you earlier, other pens to ink and give you a good contrasting color. But the Deco pen has ink in it, paint. And you hear the ball bearing in there that stirs up the paint. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you get a pen that will do that. And so when you go to, if you find these in a store somewhere, be sure you pick it up and shake it. And if you don't hear that ball bearing rolling back and forth, that means the pen's been there for quite some time. So you just pass on, try another pen, and tap them. Now, I've had a series of these pens sitting in my garage for years. And they've been in there so long, you hear nothing. It's dried out. I can't use it anymore. And I can't get the pen to perform the function for which it was designed because I let it sit for so long. However, there's another story I want to tell you. When you have finished when you use these pens, and of course you got to realize I'm doing several hundred of these dice inking operations every day. When I ink, eventually what's going to happen is paint builds up on the tip, and one time I'm inking and there will be a big blob of ink on the dice. And that's because the point of the pen has gotten fouled to such an extent that it can no longer allow the ink to come down the barrel the way it should. And I can't, this one is so old I can't even get the pen point free. But here's another pen that I was using a few weeks ago, and as you see, you can pull that pen point out quite easily. Now, as you do so, carefully wiggle it back and forth like this, because directly underneath it is a fiber tip. Now you want to clean this thing, and you don't want to use a lot of expensive stuff to do it. So there's a very simple way to clean it. This is the top off of a butter spray can, bottle, plastic bottle. And what you do is you put the top into the butter spray thing, and then you cover it with lighter fluid and shake it back and forth. And when you finish, it'll come out of there cleaned, and you can reinsert it in your pen. But eventually, you're going to work all the ink out of this barrel, and it's not going to ink anymore. And at that time, you get a pin, and you slowly work this fiber tip out of the pen and set it aside. And then you take a can of lighter fluid and you fill this little cavity right here with lighter fluid. When you're finished, take a pin or a toothpick and stick it down inside there and push, because there's a little trap door in there. And when you do that, it pushes the trap door open, and the lighter fluid runs down into the barrel, and it liberates the pen, the ink that hasn't, or the paint that hasn't been used yet. And so when you're finished with that, get the fiber tip and you put it back into the barrel, and then I don't know where I left the tip. Here it is. You put the tip back over, and the pen is ready to perform again. So you can do this resuscitation 2, maybe 3 times before you've really used up all of the paint that's in the pen. And it's been a long time since I bought these pens. I don't know if they're selling it for about $4.50 or $5, but they're considerably more expensive than the Sharpies. But they have their purposes, because you can't put black ink on a dice of this hue and read what you have put down very easily. There's not any contrast there. So what you really need is the contrast that you get from a white pen. And when you're going to ink dice, one of the things you need to do is get a piece of white paper and lay it down, and then a square of wax paper. You get a sheet of wax paper, fold it twice, and lay it on here. Now you've got a white surface that's refracting light back up and makes it easier for you to see the task that you want to perform. Now I'm going to take a fresh one of these deco pens, and they're always sealed with plastic, and getting the plastic off is a bit of a chore. So we're going to stop the camera while I fiddle with this one to get it clear, because there's no point in watching me waste. If you look at the top of the pen, you'll see that there's a place where you can stick your fingernail and you can rupture the plastic. And then after it's ruptured, you've got a little piece that you can pull to liberate the balance of the pen if you want to do it and get it all off. Pull it down. But what I'm going to do next is show you that when you first uncover that cap, the pen will not write. What you have to do to get it started, you shake it a couple of times and then push it down like this and keep tapping. And now you see that there's drops of white paint coming down on the paper. And if you had had the wax paper there, it will just hit the wax paper, but the pen is ready to work. Can you see how beautifully this pen is just lining the digits with ink? And my hand isn't very steady under this light, but I'm making all kinds of mistakes, but I'm not going to worry about it because I've got the eraser pen that I can use on it afterwards. So this is why, and this is the way you do it. What you don't want to do is you don't want to touch the faces of the pen, the faces of the dice, because you'll leave fingerprints on them, and nobody wants to look at numbers that have a fingerprint ridge over them. Now, because this is a 10-sided shape, it's easy to grasp the North Pole and the South Pole protrusion. Now, that paint takes time to dry. So what you'd have to do is, if you were doing a set, is you leave it alone. But the first thing I would do when I'm doing a set is I will ink the 20-sided dice first, and I will do the equator on it. And then I will do the 12-sided dice next, and I will do the two digits that run parallel, and I'll put my thumb on the two faces that protrude, and that way I haven't put any finger pressure on any of the digits that are being inked around the 12-sided dice. Then I set it off to one side, and I go back, and you can do the 8 in a single move, just like I did the 10 over here. And you can do the decatur in a single move. Then you do the 6 and the so forth and so on. By the time you finish the whole series of dice, you can come back to the 20. And what you're going to do next is, because you have 5 faces on each end of the dice that have no ink in the digits, you now will ink those in. But you can hold it on the equator, and you will not be leaving fingerprints because the equator's had plenty of time to dry. Now I'm going to use the pen. You can see that this 0 has a couple of blemishes. The once where I slipped out of the digit and so forth. And then after you do that, rub it with your finger. Pa-ba, we got a beautiful piece. You saw me slip out of the 4. We use this, get it going. Ta-da! This underline on the 6 looks like it could use a little repair. Ta-da! And that's how you use the eraser pen. It's just a really easy thing to do, and that's what you need to know about inking the dice. Now, I'm going to show you something that I didn't have time to bring to focus in the first seminar I provided. Most of you do not have a micrometer, which is what this tool is called. And you could use a micrometer to measure the thousandths of an inch difference between face number 1 and 20, which is at the opposite side, and so forth and so on. But how I discovered that the dice from Taiwan, all the rounded edge dice, were really out of tolerance was I was sitting at a convention, and I happened to have with me one of these, and I'll bet every one of you has got a crescent wrench somewhere in your house. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you exactly what happened the first time I started messing with the crescent wrench. I opened it up, and I put face number 1 facing up, and I screwed that crescent wrench as tight as I could get it, and then I wiggled it and tried to free that number 1. And then I went to face number 2 and tried to see, could I get face number 2 to go in there? And the dice from Taiwan, I couldn't get the face in there. So that one meant that it was bigger, and I had to go back and open the jaws. And the next time I tightened up the jaws on face number 2 and I tried to get face number 1 in there, I couldn't do it. So what this does is it shows you, since you don't mess with the twister, it shows you that each of these faces has a slightly different measurement to it. And I have measured my own dice, and they're not to the same degree of precision that casino dice are, because they're not made smooth to a tolerance of 1/5000th of an inch, which is what casino dice enjoy, or 1/10,000th of an inch, which is what most of the dice manufacturing people use when they're making dice for casino purposes. But I measured my own dice for this camera demonstration, and I found out that my face number 3 was 754, and that face number 2 was 752, and face number 1 was 751. I measured all the other faces on here, and 751 was the smallest number, and 754 was the biggest number. So I've got, 2 or 3 thousandths of an inch difference between some of my faces. But when I measured the dice from Taiwan, I was finding 15 and 20 thousandths of an inch, which is a lot. And I went to a game convention with a micrometer, and I said to one of the customers standing at my booth, "Here, take this and measure the dice." He said, "Don't hand me that thing. I ain't got time to stand here and measure 20 faces. I'm not going to do that." And so then I realized that was a bust, and that's when I got the idea, well, maybe if I stacked them on top of each other, you could see the difference between the heights of all the dice. So now you know more about how to ink these dice properly. And there's a couple of other little things that, this is petty stuff, but you got to understand what's going on. This is a 14-sided dice, and it has numbers as well as days of the week. Now the days of the week are on this dice and very, very small and hard to read. And as far as I know, it is almost impossible. At least I don't have the skill to do it. This is a face that says Wednesday on it, and I can't get the pen point to go down in where it says Wednesday. So the better way to make sure that this is going to look good and read is you just smear across the top, and that way ink will go down into the digits that you can't really read. But when I'm going to ink one like this, the first thing I do is I ink all the digits at the equator, and then I set the dice aside if I've been using white paint and let it dry. When I pick it up later and it's dried, then I do this smear across the days of the week. And what you're going to have to do then is either rub it with your finger to get the excess paint that you don't want off, which takes a lot of effort, and you can see I should probably rub this some more because it's not really clean. Or I could take my pen eraser and get rid of it in a hurry. And then when you do this, you've really got a nice, easy reading little bit of lettering. One of my clients, one of my kids at the game convention came to me and he said, "Look, you got days of the week on your 14-sided dice. Why don't you ink one hemisphere in blue and the other hemisphere in red?" And I'm thinking, well, damn, I'm going to have to change a pen, and I'm going to have to remember that I've got to do, that's extra trouble and extra effort. And if a store was to do that, he'd probably have to charge more because it takes more time to do it. But why am I going to ink one hemisphere in red and one hemisphere in blue? And he said, because then when you roll the dice, it's not only Tuesday, it's Tuesday morning or Tuesday evening. And I thought, boy, what a brilliant idea. I wish I had been smart enough to figure that out. So I'm passing that along to you so that if you get one of our large 12-piece sets, you're going to get a 3, a 5, a 14, a 16, and a 24, which are shapes that nobody else in this dice industry makes. And you're also going to get a set of instructions. Now, I gave a free 24-sided dice to Knights at the Dinner Table. I gave them several, and I said, why don't you run a designing contest on how to use the 24-sided dice? And these are the 5 award-winning suggestions. Later, I gave them a 14-sided dice, and they printed another series of award-winning suggestions. And on the back of this sheet, it tells what to do with a 3, what to do with a 5, what to do with a 7, and so forth and so on. So when you get that 12-piece set, you're going to find you have a lot more latitude open for helping you spin the story out in your favorite style of telling. Now, there was another point that I wanted to make with regard to this, and that is, I have a lot of Dungeons and Dragons players come to me and they say, who needs a 3-sided dice? And I said, well, didn't you ever hear of 4 minus 1? Well, yeah, but who needs a 3-sided dice? Well, what's 4 minus 1? Isn't that 3? Well, yeah, but, and so I want to make sure you understand that 4 minus 1 is a 3, and you can use it for the outcome of daggers and small weapons. But we did a strange thing with this. You see on this 3-sided dice that there are numbers out at the tip. And so 1, 2, and 3 is out at the tip. But in the center of the dice we have RPS. And that's not because it's supposed to stand for Roadway Package Service. It's supposed to stand for rock, paper, scissors. Now there's a lot of people who play Vampire, and they are having problems with other players who are using the old slow draw coming out with the Rochambeau. And as they come forward, you know, they're delaying so that they can see whether you got paper, scissors, or rock, and then they're going to form their hand into the shape that beats you. So if you got a character that's been doing that to you, you give him this 3-sided dice and you say, you go ahead and you set up what is your choice, and then you cover it with your hand. Now I'll show you what I'm doing. And that way this guy doesn't have an advantage over you in the resolution of combat. Another is the 5-sided dice, which we've rolled 100,000 times to make sure that 3/5 of the time it comes up on its edges and 2/5 of the time it comes up on its triangular faces. It's shaped like a Vicks cough drop, but it really does the job. However, after telling a store owner how it gives you equal access to all the digits, I started to make my point by rolling it repeatedly on her glass showcase. And it rolled 10 times in a row, flat, which was a shock. And that's when I realized we had done our testing on 6mm thick plastic and 12mm thick plastic. But plastic gives a bounce back to the dice. So when you're using our dice, what you want to do is make sure that you roll the dice on a wooden surface or a plastic surface. But if you roll it on wood, if you roll it on metal, and if you roll it on glass, those are surfaces that do not give you the bounce back on the dice, and consequently it will not perform as I've designed it to perform. So give yourself a break and make sure that you don't shortchange yourself. Another thing is a lot of people play on tablecloths, and the tablecloth will cushion the fall of the die and diminish its ability to perform like it's been designed to perform. So give yourself an even break and make sure that when you're going to play, you're playing on a wooden surface or a plastic surface. Thank you very much for your time.